Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to everyone. Before I start my discussion on the topic assigned to me, genesis of usurping the system coup of state machinery, I would like to request all the dignitaries kindly stand up in silence for a minute in the memory of our late Chief of Defence Staff, Shri Bipin Rawat. Thank you so much. All of you may take your seats now.
Junaid, excuse me, so I beg a pardon, so I have quoted you on this topic, otherwise you was a genesis of arresting of the coup of a state missionary. Sorry for that, because so, sorry for that,
No.
Once again.
So the spree of discussions being held today at this convention is the reflections of contributions made by General Rawat as the discussions are widening the scope of defense of India. Identifying the lacunas within institutions and proposing solutions is the best way to improve the functioning of the state machinery. The genesis of usurpation of the system, a coup of the state machinery, is my topic of discussion. And I, in my monologue, would like to discuss factors that have made this usurpation possible, and also would like to shed some light on the transition of Kashmiri political and working class from being the custodians to perpetrators who facilitated the systematic growth of subversion in state machinery. Indian Union in Jammu and Kashmir was merely a product of this territory when Jammu and Kashmir joined the Union of India. And then Article 370 guaranteed this arrangement, and for a long time, even after a series of amendments in it, the erstwhile Jammu and Kashmir did not completely integrate with Union of India. The tallest leader in Jammu and Kashmir, Shri Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah, who to start with had agreed for JK to be a part of India as defined by Article 370. Later on started hobnobbing with Pakistan to plan its secession from the Indian Union. The end result of his betrayal of the agreement was that he was imprisoned and Shri Bakshi Ghulam Ahmad was made the new Prime Minister of erstwhile JNK. The act of jailing him angered his followers, and they were made to believe that Government of India and its political leadership had stabbed their tallest leader in the back and installed their puppet as the Prime Minister. So I tell you, Sheikh was never honest in his political intent, and thereby created a lot of confusion amongst his followers. Yet on his release from the jail and smelling the possibility of attaining political power in the state, post-signing Indira Sheikh Accord in 1974, he pretended that he had given up on the idea of independent JNK or its merger with Pakistan. He is known to have said that Article 370 was not such a pious document that it could not be changed and suggested that its abrogation would lead the way to progress and development in the state. Sheikh agreed to occupy the chair of Chief Minister while he had been Prime Minister, delusioned his very huge following, and they felt betrayed by their leader, who had been promising them merger of Jammu Kashmir with Pakistan or a sovereign state of Jammu and Kashmir. The political propaganda had been carried out by his close associates in Jammu Kashmir National Conference while he was in prison, and therefore out of power until 1974. His acceptance of Chief Minister's post alienated his mass following, and they labelled him as power hungry. And then the Jamaat Islami and Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front (JKLF) were two political outfits in the Kashmir Valley that harbored political aspirations inimical to the integrity of Union of India. While the Jamaat lay dormant, the JKLF has been active at certain levels, like hijacking the Indian Airlines plane, only to internationalize the so-called Kashmir issue. Jamaat Islami stood for merger with Pakistan and the JKLF for an independent sovereign state. Alienated from their tallest leader, the masses gravitated towards Jamaat Islami and JKLF. Why I am explaining all this? Because the topic is genesis. I will explain a little bit of genesis of usurping the system, then I will come on the coup of the state machinery. So post creation of Bangladesh around 1972, the Jamaat Islami remained convinced that India had cut Pakistan into two pieces, and therefore the responsibility to teach India a lesson lay on them. Jamaat Islami always identified itself with Pakistan based on the commonality of the religion, and always stood for the Valley's merger with Pakistan. And merger with Pakistan was Jamaat's declared political aspiration, and creation of Bangladesh highly motivated them to disintegrate Kashmir from India in order to take revenge from India's bifurcation of Pakistan. At the other end of political spectrum, in the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, where the so-called mainstream parties represented by Jammu Kashmir National Conference, Congress, PDP, People's Conference, and a mix of communist cardholders that were appendage of Congress at a point of time. The National Congress was ruling at the center and trusted the Jammu Kashmir National Conference and local Congress party as the political outfits that stood for the integrity of the Indian Union, while the JKL and Jamaat Islami were vocal about their anti-India postures. The mainstream parties turned out to be the backstabbers. In this August gathering, I won't be partial to any ideology, and the right identification of problems can only lead us to viable solutions. So please pardon me for pointing out some harsh realities on the topic. I am discussing the systematic ideological brainwashing of Muslim majority of Kashmiri population led to the coup of not only the state machinery from within, but also the spirit of Kashmiriyat as well. The people were being taught hate, and hate got glorified against non-Muslims living in Kashmir and India as a nation. Religion was to be the basis for polarizing, indoctrinating, brainwashing the local Kashmiri Muslims against Indian state, for preaching that Hindu India had broken Muslim Pakistan into two and had also occupied Jammu and Kashmir territory. Strategizing the breakup of India was done in mosques, while the government of the day looked the other way. The Muslim employees of all the government departments, institutions, were polarized against the Indian occupation and were given the tasks of identifying all the pro-India people and document their family details, residential addresses, professions and religion and other things, like what Swincer was saying. Likewise, they are still doing our profile. Long back it used to happen also. When all this was going on, yet the advice was to maintain cordial and friendly behavior with all in order to avoid any cause for any kind of suspicion, exposure about their activities. Then you see, the conservatism in Islam was conceived to be the way to disrupt tolerant Sufi Shaviti culture of Kashmir. Aggressively, money was made to flow in favor of Jammu Kashmir Jamaat Islami for ramping up its activity in the valley of Kashmir. Literature encapsulated in excellent quality print was being made available in Kashmir for Muslims to refer to. The education in rural areas came under the control of Jamaat Islami, and the indoctrination of anti-India propaganda got institutionalized through the educational invasion. Mosques and schools started preaching and teaching conservatism, exclusivism and intolerance to the people of various age groups, and also misrepresenting history by distorting the United Nations resolution in order to prove India as the occupier. Without even touching the background of the Kashmir problem, the devotional way of Kashmiri living and the educational need of Kashmiri Muslims got targeted, and through corrupt information on history and religion in educational and theocratic institutions, polarization was imbibed in the psyche of people of Jammu and Kashmir. Now you see, the ideological dominance created people who could compete for public sector jobs within the state system, yet continue to rear hate against the country, which had kept every opportunity to livelihood in Jammu and Kashmir exclusively for its citizens. Not even the land was touched by the central government in order to assure that India as the mother country never intended to exploit her citizens of Jammu and Kashmir. You see, the central government spent billions on Kashmir by trusting the so-called custodians of erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. These custodians from politics, bureaucracy, and even at the clerical levels played Jack and Jill with the money, and through corruption and lack of competence made a mess out of everything that was being invested in Kashmir by the center. And then the iron curtain of Article 370, coupled with the exhorts of Kashmiri Pandits, the most educated section of Kashmir, paved way for them only to communally polarize people within the state machinery. The parallelogram of Kashmiri politics designed by Pakistan into mainstream and separatism with the 370 production kept Kashmir isolated, and the people who got in made material gains for themselves by discouraging democratic participation among the people who had no access to state institutions but democracy. I would like to point out a very shocking incident which was narrated to me by a candidate who had decided to fight for Panchayati elections recently. The young 25-year-old guy who had gone for registering his nomination to the registration office, you will be shocked to hear what the official in charge told the guy. He was told not to participate in the elections And this was anti-Kashmir exercise and was against the Kashmiri mission on Azadi. This is how coup happens. This is how they first intoxicate, venomize minds through bureaucracy, through politics, through different institutions of education. This double-faced attitude of Kashmiri state machinery has been making the Indian state in the eyes of people of Jammu and Kashmir. The internal coup was only orchestrated through education and communally preaching. It was also realized through a large number of target killings of various patriots in state politics, bureaucracy, and even in civil society. Indian state had only one representation on ground in Kashmir, and that was the armed forces. The job of army is to fight, and in an ideal world of guns and roads, they don't go together. The armed forces were taking on an insurgency which had popular support on ground due to the efforts of the Jamaat Islami since 1972. The terrorists entered post-1987, but the preparations for the coup had already been made by Jamaat Islami for enabling mass support to the incoming insurgents. The insurgents then targeted minorities and genuine Indian Kashmiri in order to get rid of all possible resistance that they would face from the locals. They created fear among Indians, while the traitors developed by Jamaat got access into the state machinery and started eating up the system from within like termites. These custodians were not serving the state or public, but were robots that were programmed to resist all sorts of nationalist traits within the state machinery. They discouraged democratic participation, kept working for separatist lobbies, and also concurred with separatism in their non-official interactions with the people. The system got jammed at so many junctions due to the chaos in Kashmir that corruption, incompetence, lack of vision, and hate against India got amalgamated and made the subservience of Indian authority over J&K, but it later on the board, while dynasts enjoyed their seats of power, which they got through appeasing politics and emotional appealing towards commoners of Jammu and Kashmir. The custodians of state in Jammu and Kashmir, of government in state and administration, could not take on the propaganda of Pakistan, which was happening in the front of them, even when they all had the power to seize the activities of the organizations. They did not deliberately. They were found spewing venom against India openly in isolation of Article 370, preventing a free exchange of information, insights between center government and the region. You see, mosques, schools, colleges, universities, offices, markets, and even media had the politics of separatism perpetuated by Pakistan. Media gave huge space to the news related to separatism. And people were flooded with information on activities of separatism and statements made by Pakistani government on the Kashmir issue. Just allow me a moment, I'm about to conclude. Because the topic
time is running.
Just wait a minute.
Once we have allotted a time space, so you have to be followed.
See, before, flags of Pakistan were a common sight in Kashmir, with walls painted with slogans against India and in favor of terrorists and Pakistan. Kashmir, post-1990, became a colony of Pakistan, where the coup of Indian state had been realized within institutions and in the mental space of people who had nothing but hate for their mother country. The proceedings in the government offices would always be monitored by the officials who sympathized with Pakistan. Lawyers, even lawyers talked on separatist lines, and the Bar Council became the bed for Pakistan and became yet another wing of this parallel rule of separatism in Kashmir. You see, from judiciary to legislature to executive, Pakistan had infiltrated in and overthrown the sovereignty of India, while our forces having to handle all the offshoots of this infiltration. All this went on while Jammu Kashmir National Conference, Congress, People's Conference, PDP, were the ruling party supposedly promoting Indian interest in the region. These political outfits who had been, ruling the state since 1947 did nothing to stop this vicious agenda of anti-India political outfits. The blame for insurgency then in J&K against the Indian Union lays squarely on the mainstream political parties, as they had been in power since 1947, and they were duty-bound to disallow any such political subversion in order not to only maintain law and order, but also the integrity of Indian Union, as they had deliberately planned to fail in shouldering their responsibilities, as their sympathies too lay with Pakistan because of the commonality of religion. Then, when the government servants engage themselves in activities inimical to the interests of the governments, such activities cannot escape the eyes of bosses in the administrative sector. And nor can these escape from the eyes of the mainstream political leadership. The only way it can happen is when the government of the day colludes with the conspirators. And the subversion, what Swainsaw was saying, of our system had brought things to a level that after the successful management of every uprising, be it armed or unarmed, Pakistani frustrations got manifested in such a manner that separatists openly came in protest the killing of terrorist Burhan Wani in 2016. Since then, various things regarding the Pakistan propagated separatism got clear in the eyes of rest of the world, and finally things started to change. The blind, ignorant behavior of Pakistani loyalists in Kashmir was understood by the nation, and the incumbency started looking for solutions to problems. All the offices of state in Kashmir have the loyalists of Pakistani in them. And I have no fear in saying, I've seen them. Some are the relatives of separatists. Some have been appointed on the recommendations of separatists. Some are unrelated, but due to the atmosphere which has been surrounding them has made them hate India. Kashmir has been a space where love for India meant collaboration with the oppressor and invited social boycott and shame for one and all in the Kashmiri society. This spirit still exists in the society, but over time is bound to change. Then, in Kashmir, we know there are only few people that can be trusted. The state machinery has been made a full, lifeless hole filled with people whose professional obligations are totally different from the political goals. They serve Indian state inefficiently and justify their employment as their right, but in the same breath are in love with the idea of separation from India. To a large extent, the spirit and the vigor of separatism has been damaged since the 370 abrogation, but the sympathizers of separatism still exist and are holding back the take of Kashmir into a developed, modernized society. Today, when Jammu and Kashmir is in the phase of restructuring, democratic, I see it's being a retrograde trait on our part to trust people like Lone, whose father was the man who drafted the strategy of bleed India with 1,000 cuts, with General Ziaul Haq that time. Can he be trusted? These are the people who at the end of the day led coup of the state machinery. Then muftis, जिन जमातियों के बारे में हम डिस्कशन कर रहे हैं, it was these muftis who regularized the Jamaat teachers into the general line teaching and handed over education, the most crucial form of instruction, in the hands of the enemy. And then the same muftis who appreciate Pakistan for successful elections in Jammu and Kashmir, can they be trusted? The Abdullahs who are, I believe, the curse to the cause of democracy, not only through their dynastic politics, but their bigotry in encouraging separatism on ground, and in the same breath portraying themselves as die-hard Indians in front of the rest of the struggle. Thank you so much.